Bom, muito boa tarde a todos, sejam bem-vindos ao ISCTE. É um prazer ter a casa cheia. Queria, antes de mais, dar as boas-vindas ao Jan Gehl por esta apresentação aqui no ISCTE, o lançamento do livro A Vida entre os Edifícios. Esta organização esteve a cargo do DINΑΜΙΑ'CET-IUL e corresponde ao lançamento da obra de Jan Gehl, traduzida em português, portanto, uma iniciativa da editora Tigre de Papel e da Cicloficina dos Anjos. Portanto, a tradução desta obra esteve a cargo do Tiago Mesquita de Carvalho, que está aqui connosco esta noite. Portanto, queria também agradecer ao ISCTE o facto de nos ter proporcionado o lançamento do livro e esta conferência aqui no grande auditório. É sempre algo que nos enche de orgulho ver a casa cheia e tanto interesse em relação às nossas iniciativas. Queria saudar muito particularmente o Sr. Embaixador da Dinamarca, aqui presente, que nos honra também neste momento especial. Queria fazer uma pequena introdução àquilo que vamos aqui hoje assistir. Portanto, o Jan Gehl é um arquiteto dinamarquês, nasceu em 1936. Esta sua obra famosa, A Vida entre os Edifícios, é um livro que foi lançado pela primeira vez em 1971, numa altura em que, de certa maneira, as convicções em torno da cidade moderna começavam a apresentar algumas fissuras. O livro é, de certa maneira, precursor de um conjunto de acontecimentos que vieram ainda na década de 70 a ocorrer, como, por exemplo, a crise do petróleo em 1973, ou, do ponto de vista mais teórico, aquilo que o Charles Jenkins nos veio anunciar com a demolição de Pritogoy, em St. Louis, Missouri, portanto, a demolição do conjunto de edifícios que abre a época pós-moderna. O livro de Jan Gehl insere-se dentro de um conjunto de outras obras que, mais ou menos por este período, vieram a lume, trazendo para cima da mesa questões que envolvem a geografia, a paisagem urbana e a psicologia ambiental. Algumas obras que são mais ou menos recorrentes no estudo que nós fazemos em Portugal, como, por exemplo, A Imagem da Cidade, do Kevin Lynch, A Paisagem Urbana, do Gordon Cullen, ou A Morte e Vida das Grandes Cidades, de Jane Jacobs. Todos estes livros dos anos 60 e que acabam por vir a inspirar aquilo que é esta obra fundamental de Jan Gehl. Portanto, alguns acontecimentos também que eu acho que são interessantes mencionar para situar a transformação que as cidades acabaram por ter um pouco em torno deste pensamento, algo que nós podíamos situar entre o início de uma grande transformação do pensamento urbano, por exemplo, relacionado com o IBA de Berlim, depois com toda a transformação do espaço público em Espanha, com o Barcelona 92, e depois com a Expo 98 em Portugal e com o Porto 2001, portanto, que são um conjunto de acontecimentos que, desde o ponto de vista internacional até ao ponto de vista nacional, vieram a potenciar a importância do espaço público, a humanização do espaço público e uma transformação muito profunda daquilo que são as oportunidades de transformação da cidade e da sua própria humanização. Portanto, o livro de Gehl foi acompanhando todo este processo em sucessivas edições, quase 4 décadas de sucessivas edições, e foi acompanhando todo este processo, o que faz com que, de certa maneira, tenha transposto também a própria área disciplinar da arquitetura, transformando-se numa espécie de manifesto mais amplo relacionado com as ciências sociais e humanas de uma maneira mais ampla, não é? Portanto, através da obra de Gehl, nós acabamos por ter argumentos para falar das relações de vizinhança, das relações que envolvem a esfera pública, e também de uma maneira muito significativa sobre a configuração de novos idealismos que são, de certo modo, capazes de contrapor os excessos da economia liberal. Portanto, por tudo isto, o livro continua a ser um livro de grande importância e, sobretudo, no contexto da cidade de Lisboa, reveste-se de uma importância acrescida, porque nós estamos num processo de grande transformação do espaço público, A cidade de Lisboa tem neste momento em curso uma grande alteração da sua configuração, da sua representação portanto, há um conjunto de fenómenos que estão associados a toda esta transformação, que são bastante visíveis na requalificação de todo o espaço público que temos assistido nos últimos anos na cidade de Lisboa. E por tudo isto, eu penso que há uma enorme oportunidade nesta iniciativa da Tigre de Papel e da Cicloficina dos Anjos, e, portanto, e por tudo isto também é um prazer para nós, enquanto ISCTE, acolhermos esta iniciativa. Eu agora ia passar a palavra ao Tiago e depois dava-se então a conferência do Jan Gehl, que apresentará a sua obra, seguindo-se posteriormente um período de perguntas e um pequeno debate, e depois, por fim, faremos uma sessão de autógrafos no exterior do auditório. Portanto, uma vez mais, muito obrigado pela vossa presença.
Olá, boa tarde. Também vou tentar não demorar, mas como vinha neste momento, além de agradecer a todos os presentes e àqueles que o Paulo já o fez, contextualizar um pouco a maneira como este livro pôde aparecer, como este projeto pôde aparecer. Eu conheço o Bernardino há cerca de 10 anos, e já nos tínhamos envolvido um com o outro a nível do ativismo da bicicleta e do ativismo pelos peões, digamos assim, ou pela conquista de um espaço que estivesse fora da alçada, do âmbito de uma cidade que é tragada pelos automóveis. E quando a Cicloficina, quando apresentei este projeto à Cicloficina para traduzir esta obra importante de Jan Gehl, a Tigre de Papel, pela sua função, foi um parceiro natural. A Tigre de Papel é uma livraria que encontra-se ali na Rua de Arroz, implementada há cerca de um ano. Tem como função, além de ter obras atuais, mas também livros em segunda mão, e relançar aquele que foi um bocado do papel dos cafés de outrora, de colocar o debate sobre questões pertinentes no próprio seio da livraria, discutir o conteúdo dos livros, e também como função editorial de que esta obra de Jan Gehl é uma das primeiras obras a ser publicada pela Livraria Tigre de Papel. É um excelente exemplo. Portanto, resta-me agradecer ao Bernardino e ao Fernando, da Tigre de Papel, à Ana Teresa Ascensão, que foi responsável pelo design da capa, resta-me só falar um pouco sobre o projeto da Cicloficina dos Anjos e também agradecer a todos os voluntários que a têm composto ao longo destes 6 anos. A Cicloficina dos Anjos, tal como a Tigre de Papel, é um projeto local ali da zona dos Anjos, Arroios, e que, tal como disse, há 6 anos que tem a responsabilidade ou tem o intuito de transmitir a arte de reparação e manutenção e afinação de bicicletas a todos os que nos visitam. Fora de uma cultura de lucro, fora de uma cultura de serviços, tentamos envolver o participante devido à própria simplicidade mecânica da bicicleta. Tentamos envolver o participante na arte de reparar bicicletas. E fazemos lá 6 anos, funcionámos no Regueirão dos Anjos, que é uma rua que, por ter muito pouco tráfego pedonal, permitiu que as pessoas se aproximassem, experimentassem e convivessem e criassem espaço público. Com práticas, com convivência, gera-se um clima propício a que não só bicicletas, mas peões se possam encontrar e criar cidade. Portanto, terminando e passando a palavra ao Jan Gehl, resta-me agradecer aos voluntários da Cicloficina, sem a qual isto não teria sido possível, e também uma última palavra para os revisores do livro, o Ricardo Ventura e o Pedro Cerejo. E agora penso que vou dar a palavra àquele que é o protagonista desta tarde. Jan Gehl, I think the show is up to you now.
Thank you guys for the very nice speech. I felt it was very friendly, and I approve of everything what you said. I have some good news for all of you. First, I'll say thank you very much for inviting me here for this publishing event and for this lecture. I've been looking forward to coming here, as I always look forward to visit Portugal. I have some good news for you. The bad news, of course, are that there are no simultaneous translation, and the good news is that English is my second language. I can only speak very slowly, and I can only know 300 words. So the English I can speak, you can understand. I hope. It is really a great joy for me to be here and see another version of one of my books, and especially this one, which was the first one, and maybe also in many ways the most important one, being published in yet another place. I will tell you a little bit about the story of the last 50 years, where also this book is included. Here we are. I'll talk about the need for livable European cities, actually the need for livable cities all over the world, and on how important it is to put people first in your planning to achieve this goal of making a livable city. I also have this other title from Jan Gehl, Until Today, until this book. Actually, Jan Gehl, in the English version, she wrote that she enjoyed this particular book very much, had it on her night table, and wrote that it was delicious and thoughtful. That could have been on the back cover here. I'm very proud of this connection between this book and this lady. Now we start. This book, and actually most of the work I've been involved in, has been very much centered around these two major planning paradigms which have totally dominated European and world planning for the last 50 years. One of them being modernism. And I'm not going to give you a major talk on modernism, but as far as I can see, it was the most radical manipulation with human settlements which has ever been done. These guys didn't know that every brick you make influences the quality of life for people. They just had a number of visions and ideas, and I can understand the background was the very dense slum areas of 100 years ago, but they were very radical and they didn't know what they were doing. Just to mention, this is a sketch by Corbusier, and that was part of the ideology. He said that cities are bad, everything associated with city is bad, what is good is freestanding buildings and grass, and he called this the vertical garden city because everybody could see some grass from the windows. Later on they could only see the parking lot, but that's another story. They were very radical, these modernists. They started out in the 20s, and in the 30s they made this famous Charter of Athens in 1933. You must never put residence and workplace and recreation and communication together. Always separate the functions. Never put these things together. Also in this movement, they defined that everything old was redundant, could not be used again. They declared that now we have another species which we built for, that is modern man. And you girls can see that it is a man. It's a very busy man running to his work and back home and sleep and back to work. And in this movement, they said that everything which we have collected of wisdom about human settlements in all the history of mankind had to be thrown out. But now we had a new person, the modern man, and he needed something completely different. He needed new residences, new architecture. new site planning and new city planning. Everything should be for modern man. Until the modernists started to have great influence, what was really in focus in city planning were the spaces and the life of the cities. This is a square from Venice, and that's typical of what was in focus before. It was the life of the city, the life between the buildings, and the spaces where the life could thrive. With the modernists, the focus was turned from the spaces and the life to objects and transport. And instead of spaces now, what was not built upon was leftover space. And it's very difficult for people to do anything with leftover space. This beautiful drawing is this plan of Corbusier for Paris. To make a really nice Paris, he suggested that we take down Paris and build 24 high-rise where all the Parisians could see how beautiful Paris had become. And in between these high-rise there was a number of freeways, and that was the vision. I call this the Brasilia syndrome. And that's because I was trained in the 50s. I was trained as a good modernist. And every 2 times a day, we all bent towards Brasilia. I thought, gee, that's the modern city. That's great. That's how it should be. Brasilia is fantastic. Fantastic city. From the airplane, it's fantastic. It's an eagle, and the head of the eagle is a parliament. Couldn't be a better city. Also, from the helicopter, it looks smashing. Here are the monuments of Nehemiah lying around this great, great lawn in the middle. Great from the helicopter. Down at eye level, Brasilia, in my point of view, is shit. They never thought about that there would be Brazilians there. They never thought that day life would happen there. And still, now, 50 years later, they walk up and down on these completely silly walkways without trees, without shade, whatever. So people were not part of that vision. It was made from great height, aeroplane planning. As far as I can see now, modernism, that was a goodbye to the concern for people, to the concern for life and spaces. Now we had all these leftover spaces which were declared, this is where you can play, this is where you can move. Modernism was also a goodbye to care for details for people. Of course they made details. This wonderful bench here I found along a canal somewhere, and I thought, gee, that's really concern for people. Think about you taking your girlfriend over there and sit there and tell about what a wonderful life is waiting you. Very romantic, actually. Modernism was also, which I can see now, a goodbye to human scale. Until this time, all the settlements were built upon Homo sapiens and his senses and his body. But now, in all these leftover spaces, all of them became too big, and people were then forced to move about in all these featureless leftover spaces. And worse still, the architects and the planners got completely confused about scale. So gradually we learned, we came to know nothing about good scale. We just made it too big, everything. The other big paradigm, which had been around for a long time, but really in 1960, which I also choose to mention the modernism, because 1960 was the time when really modernism was rolled out. That was a time when the cities expanded, when the suburbs were being built in great numbers, and that was the time when really we started to roll out modernism Before that, nothing much was made, but after that, a lot has been made. Also, with cars, we had these old cars, yeah, but from 1960, it started to be really widespread, and they came in great droves, and then planning for make the cars happy became the major purpose of city planning. That was to organize so you have as many cars as possible, so as much capacity and all that. Focus on transportation. Automobile invasion started in a very friendly way. The Danish ambassador here can recognize a square from Copenhagen, one of the main squares. 1905, it was a square for people, and they were walking all over, and they were careless. It was their city, wonderful. There was one car, no problem. Then there came more cars, and it became a problem, and it became a matter of saving your life and running for your life and sort of squeezing in on the sidewalks. And then we have the third phase from Moscow, pedestrian crossing in Moscow, combined parking space and pedestrian crossing, where you can train your slalom. Third phase, the car is king and totally dominating. Also with modernism, we further got confused about scale, because in the old days, when we have 5 kilometer an hour cities, the spaces were small, the signs were small, we could maneuver very easily when we walked, we could see small little things, we could see people, we could hear people, we could see the mountains in the distance, great. But with the automobiles, we started to have the 60 kilometer an hour scale, where everything was made so that you were able to maneuver at 60 kilometer. And that's good if you are moving with 60 kilometer, but it's bad for everything else. And then we made enormous areas made in this scale, which is completely uninteresting for people. So it was a goodbye to human scale, and it further confused the scale of the planners and the architects. I take 1960 as a point of departure for this discussion. And I could ask what was known about quality for people at that time. Actually, we knew virtually nothing. This is a quote, it's much later quote. It's from Enrique Peñalosa in Bogota, who say that it's really a paradox that we as human beings know so much about good habitat for mountain gorillas and Siberian tigers, but we know so very little about good urban habitat for Homo sapiens. So not much was known, and actually they didn't really realize that if you move the buildings around and if you shift the focus from the spaces to the objects, then there would be a fantastic difference for the quality of life. Then came a counter movement, and the first voice in this was Jane Jacobs, and that was from New York, and she was architectural journalist living in Greenwich Village, and the big New York urban planner Robert Moses, he had this plan to do the same project as in Paris, to take away New York, to save New York, and especially Greenwich Village and Tribeca and Soho and Little Italy and Chinatown. They were redundant and they must go. And instead there should be a big trans-Manhattan freeway, and along that endless rows of high-rise buildings where the people of New York could go up and see how happy they were. Unfortunately, in the plans, Jane Jacobs' house was going also. And so she rallied a lot of opposition, and there were fights. She was actually at some point in jail, but she won that fight. The Trans-Manhattan Freeway never happened, and the the razing of Greenwich Village and all the nice other parts of New York never happened. And she wrote down all her experiences in this book, she actually is the mother of the humanistic city planning. And she wrote everything down, and what she said here was that if the modernists and the motorists are to make the city planning in the future, it will be goodbye to the great cities and welcome to the dead cities. She also said, instead of sitting up in your ivory towers and speculate about what people ought to do, you should go down and look out of your windows and see how a city works. She had all these references to her home street, where she looked out and saw the street ballet, the sidewalk ballet, the street watchers, the corner store, the children playing. And she said, look out and see what's really happening. That's not a freeway and a lot of high-rise. That's life. That was Jane Jacobs, and she has had a very great influence. She is now passed away, but still we celebrate this book as the start of something. The story of my life. I shall need some more objects, because I was trained in School of Architecture in the 50s, and that was when really we were trained and we were taught about modernism. And I spent 5 years moving objects around. Bingo. This is a good city. This guy here is a Swedish professor. He was famous for saying that a good residential area, a good housing area, is something which looks smashing from the freeway. And he makes some of these here from a big height. That was modernism, and I was trained in that, and we were bending towards Brazil. We thought it was really fantastic new times. So I rushed out of School of Architecture to do all these wonderful things I've learned in School of Architecture. And then I married a psychologist. And then we started to have many good discussions in our house between young architects and young psychologists. And they kept saying, why are you architects not interested in people? Why didn't they teach you anything about people in School of Architecture, or in School of Landscape Architecture, or in School of Planning? Have you ever thought why your professors, why it is they go out at 4 o'clock in the morning to take the pictures for the lectures of the monuments, so there'll be no disturbing people in the foreground of the monuments? Have you thought about all that? We had not. And then we realized, of course, that between architecture and planning and the social sciences, there was this enormous gap that we knew nothing about how the built form influenced the life. And that was the start. In my case, I had to go back to School of Architecture for 40 more years to study what they didn't tell me in the first tour in School of Architecture. And what did I do there? I started to do maybe as Jacobs have suggested, look out of the window and see how people used the cities, used the architecture. And the purpose of all this was to make people visible. And I sometimes say that it's so important that people are just as visible as are automobiles. Every city I know have a traffic department which every year count all the traffic, all the cars, and they have perfect statistics on the traffic. But no city I know have a department for pedestrians and public life, and no city have systematic documentation about how people use their city. That was the situation some years ago, but now more and more cities have people departments at the town hall who try to be as careful with the people and the life as the transport engineers are careful with making the cars happy. And then we can talk. If they try to make the people happy and they try to make the cars happy, Then we can have political discussion about what shall we do. Here, what did I do? I sat for 40 years or 50 years on my behind and watched by observation what was going on. I have brought two little examples of this. It's really rocket science, I can tell you. Just to mention here one thing. This is School of Architecture, Copenhagen. They moved to a new place. And a landscape architect was called in to make some wonderful lawns. And because of the fashion of landscape architects in that year, he put a big iron edge on the lawn. Beautiful. And then people were supposed to come in here. And what happened was that the moment the students turned the corner and saw the canteen with the coffee in the background, they at once, of course, because actually the students were people, they at once turned and went for the coffee and not in a right angle. Actually, right angle is only something some landscape architects think people do, but normal people, they go straight. But here, after just a week of the new School of Architecture, it was completely ruined because the buggers couldn't expect good architecture. So 3 weeks later, the landscape architect had to come out again and put this down. And I could have told him before he started that if you have a corner and a coffee, then draw a desire line and people will follow that one. So that's one example. There's another example here. Yeah, it's interesting because that's not the latest version I made, but never mind. No, we have something called the edge effect. By watching people behavior in public spaces, we of course have found that there is a very strong tendency that people doesn't like to stand in the middle of everything, floating in the... No, they sort of drift over to the edge, or even better, to a place where they can be partly hidden on the edge. And all this is very logical because all our senses are out here. By standing here, we are not in the way. And by standing here, we can see everything, and nobody can creep up on us from behind. This is a nice place to stand. That's how it is. And this is logical. It comes from the caveman who sat in the bottom of his cave and had the fire here and the wall to the back of the cave, and the saber tiger was out there behind the fire, so he was comfortable in there. That's also why we like to sit in the corner and like corner sofas and all that stuff. Edge effect, very important, very logical for man. Then I started to think about, would architects be like ordinary men? And we, of course, we did very, very careful studies. So I made studies of architect students' behavior in 4 different schools, and I found that the architects were completely like all other people. They loved to sit at the edge. And then I wondered who put up this stuff here? And who did they think would come and sit there? And I can give you an advice also. If you do this, be ready to come with some bronze people to make sure that they are used, because ordinary people would not like to sit there. All this spectacular research I started to make systematically, and that was put into this little book. And to my great surprise, I found that it started to be spread all over the world, this puny little PhD about, and it was called Life Between the Buildings, because that was exactly what the planners and architects have built out of the environment. They've done everything to make the environment dead and not great. And what was really suffering was the life between the buildings. So that was the logical title for this book, which was a counter-modernistic and counter-motoristic book. And to my surprise, it started to be spread all over the world, and I realized that there really was a great hunger for information about these things. Over the years, there's been made more and more and more books in the most funny languages, like French. And it took 45 years for the first book in French to come out. In Paris? No, in Montreal. But it's now being exported to France, which I'm very happy about. Then comes this one, Life Between Buildings, which is sort of the grandmother of the books and of all this kind of observation of human behavior and knowledge about how the physical environment influences people. I was at a conference in England when there was this guy who took up an object and he, like this, and he said, I feel sorry for you architects because your mean of communication is the still photo and the two-dimensional drawing. And by having these means of communication, you get seriously obsessed with the form, and then you think this is architecture. And you throw pictures of this to each other, but it's not architecture, it's sculpture. Architecture is the interplay between this and this. It's the interplay between form and life. And only if the interaction between form and life is successful, is this successful architecture and successful city planning. And also he said, it's much easier to study form than to study life, and even more complicated to study the interaction between life and form. This book is about the interaction. Also, I'm talking about these 50 years of the modernism and of motorism. And of course, we can see now that there's been a number of movements, a number of places where serious studies of the relation between life and form has been done. And I'm just mentioning this, that one school indeed has been the Berkeley School in America, where Alexander, Claire Cooper Marcus, Alan Jacobs, Peter Busselman, Donald Appleyard have, over a long period of time, made a number of important contributions. Another school has been the New York School around William White, and later on Project for Public Spaces. Again, they made a number of important books. And now, because I'm so old, I can also see that a third school, which have been very consistent in all these years, has been the Copenhagen School, starting with this book, and then adding, I think, some 6 further books, and has worked continuously on deepening the knowledge of how people use cities. This was, the first one was done in 1971. This was my PhD. And also it shows something about if they want life between buildings, then by golly, they shall have some. It was also in the 60s, 70s where the big protest against city planning, against cars, against imperialism, against the nuclear threat and whatever. And that was the time really where people came out to protest and to enjoy. That was the time of flower power and the student revolution. And this indeed was people streaming out of the buildings to celebrate their community rather than their isolation. Over the years, and this is some of the versions I made, and it's to me it's very, very funny to see that it starts out as a very revolutionary sort of thing, then it gets more tame and sort of provincial, and then it gets a little bit more urban, and finally it gets sort of principle. These are 50 years of this book. Now, to my great surprise, it's about bicycles. And it's interesting because there's not a word in this one about bicycles, but I always had, I was so interested in people that I overlooked the bicycles in the first round. And later on, it was, I think in the 90s, we decided that bicyclists were a sort of people. So we included people, because bicyclists were normally part of the transport engineers' work. And that was not us who did for the people. But then we realized that a street full of bicyclists is indeed a street full of people. And then we redefined bicyclism as a sort of fast pedestrianism. And then we included them. Because a city with many people walking, much public life, and many bicycles is a city with a lot of people in it. I shall return to this subject. Over the years, and that is by now, and I have to count very carefully, it's 46 or something years. This book has been coming out in one version after the other and in one funny language after the other. And it's been fantastic to see, and it is still around. It's been republished in many countries. So there's first version and second version, which has nothing to do with the first versions. There's been a lot of revisions because we came to know more. So this book is very different from the early books, but the title is the same and the vision is the same. Look after the people in the cities. Here's some little pictures of some of the versions. Much to my joy, I've seen it being taken up in developing countries. And here are some of the more from the last 10 years, Korea, Spain, republished in America, in Russia. The city of Moscow have published it in Russia. And here is a city architect of Hiroshima in Japan, proudly taking up the second republishing of the Japanese. He sent me this picture to show that in this place where so much evil had been happening, he was now trying to use this kind of humanistic approach. Taiwan, he's very happy, and Thailand. And this is Saudi Arabia and Iceland. There are the two next. Actually, it's also on its way in France, and that will be about 50 years after it first came out. But they really started to think about it down there. But here we are celebrating this one. There is here an interesting, when I looked at all this, I found a very interesting pattern. That before 2000, it was published 9 places. And after 2000, it's been spreading all over. And that coincides with the fact that from 2000, we can see all over the world that the modernism is sort of waning, and also people are tired of modernism, really tired of it. And also we can see that we are beginning very much to be tired of automobiles, and we realize that maybe automobiles is not a very smart solution to mobility for people, and much greater interest in livability, sustainability, and health is starting to emerging, and that can explain why books like this starts to be spread. And we can also see that I think we have worked with about 200 cities. We started our company in 2000, and we have been very busy ever since. I think that in the last 17 years, we really have seen a change Also in Lisboa and Portugal, you've seen a change that they set questions to the modernistic and the motoristic dominance and start to apply humanistic city planning. That's the break. That means water. I really think that by the 21st century we have new challenges, and we have definitely a new planning paradigm. Why is nothing happening? Here it is. After 50 years, we have a distinct change. If you show any mayor I know this table, livable city, sustainable city, healthy city, they'll say, oh, that's my program. And people have become really tired of cities which are not livable. And maybe we can go on here. And what is livable? To me, lively and livable is very closely connected. Because throughout history of man, we had the spaces with the life where we met and developed our culture. And the biggest interest of man is other people. And it's also always been so. We know that little children, there's nothing more interesting for little children than to see how the grown-ups, how other people are. They shall learn. So they run after the father and mother. They don't play in the children's room, they play in the living room and the kitchen, because they want to be where life is. And that goes on throughout life. People is the greatest attraction in our cities, and we are a social animal. We really like people, and we can see this all over. Maybe the oldest and most important city function of all is just watching the other people. And you may think it's a one-way activity. It's not. It's a two-way, because some people are watching here, and some people dress up smartly and be sure to walk interestingly. And if nobody watches them walking, that's a problem. Watching. We learn so much. Every day, and every of us will watch and watch and watch every day. I started at once to look at how the Portuguese looked like these years when I came in here. But that's all over, and that's very basic human behavior. So we see these public spaces in Greenland, in Vancouver, everywhere. And whenever we make good public spaces, which really are good, we can see they are used right away and in great number of people, by people. The other big challenge today is to make a sustainable city. And of course we know that the climate challenge, that the major problem is the cities, and the cities now have this C40, where they come together and discuss how to do better city planning. The mayor of New York was starting this C40, and he said, I promise to make New York the most sustainable metropole in the world. And then he started to do all his interesting things. But of course, the way we move and the way we organize our cities is very important. So if you walk much and bicycle much, it's very good for the climate. And if we are to find other ways of mobility than the private car, which we have to, and we are full speed doing it with public transportation, we need to realize that good public transportation and good public realm, they are two sides of the same story. Then we've got a new little problem. That is that for 50 years we made city planning which invited people to sit and not move. We've done everything so you can have drive-in banking and drive-in McDonald's and drive-in everything. You don't have to move at all. And now it's a great problem. My daughter is a senior doctor in this area, and she has all kinds of stories. And she tells, of course, and they all tell, that if you move just 1 hour a day, moderate exercise, walking or bicycling, you can live 7 extra years and you will have a much better quality of life in the old days, and you'll be much cheaper for society because you don't need all the doctors and the pills and whatever. And don't believe in people, all of them going to fitness centers. It's only a quarter of them who go to fitness, and only a certain periods of their life, and only if they have time. So they've realized that we have to do something else, and that's why World Health Organization would say generally in their strategy for the world, make cities so that people walk and bike as much as possible. And with 3 books in Portuguese about this, I'm sure that you will find fantastic inspiration to you, fantastic city planning. I hope it's better than this, because I'm very proud that all my books are translated for 25 years with the first one into Chinese. And they are very, very happy about the books, and I know it's spread widely because I've signed all of them, I think. And what really makes me sorry in my old days now is that they haven't had time to read them. But I hope that here in Portugal, that you will find time to look into this book and the other books in Portuguese and be inspired. So what today is wanted is livable, sustainable and healthy city. And by looking carefully after the people in city planning, you will actually very efficiently address these issues. Then I'll take now 1 hour and a half to tell you how we have worked with these issues in cities all over the world. Especially, I would have loved to show you about Moscow, who's done the most efficient city improvements I ever saw, because they have very efficient democracy in Moscow. So when the mayor say, we do this, they do that. And it's amazing. But I'll take Copenhagen as example, and I take Copenhagen because it's one of the cities which have been working on these humanistic principles for the longest time of all of them. And of course I know now that the fact that we had this research center in Copenhagen looking into these issues, it has had a really direct influence on the planning of Copenhagen. Denmark is a small place, and when some people do something like this, the mayor here, the politicians here, the city planners here, the citizens here, and then it starts to be influential, and we can see how closer and closer this cooperation between university and city became. And they always came running over to us in university and say, oh, you must study this and this because we want to make this so nice and happy. So there's a long story of how this line of thinking has influenced this particular city. Let's start here. Copenhagen has been at it for 55 years. And it started with the main street, and it was the cars were taken out of the main street in 1962. That was very, very early compared to other places in the world. It was influenced by German planning at that point, because when they rebuilt the German cities, they did not in all the cities let in the cars after the rebuilding, because from America they heard that if people walked, they bought more in the shops. So in Germany and then in Denmark, they took cars out of Main Street, Copenhagen, and there was a big commotion because all the shopkeepers thought it was absolutely crazy and their shops will go broke. And other people said that we are Danes, we are not Italians, it will never work here, it's too cold and we have no tradition or public life. We love our Volkswagen and we sit at home and look out of the window. We never go out in town. So they started to do it anyway, and next year we started to be Italians, and we have become more and more Italians every year ever since. What was happening in Copenhagen was that we at the university were able to start a tradition of documenting the life in the city, so that this was the first city in the world where the life of the city was documented as carefully as the transport engineers documented the car traffic. And that was very influential for the decisions. In '62, one street was pedestrianized to help the shopkeepers. They found out quickly that it really helped. And also they found out that many other qualities were involved. And now in Copenhagen, the city center looks like this. These are all the areas which have been addressed gradually in all these years, and it's become a pretty nice, wonderful city for people. I can see now that it comes in various stages. The first stage was the era of the pedestrian streets, and that was a focus on walking and promenade. We shall try to make it possible to walk without being run over by motor cars. But then came the next phase in the 80s and onwards to 2000, where the focus shifted not only walking, but also walking, and then when you got tired, you should be able to sit and have fun, and then started the recreation. If we ask people 40 years ago, why are you in town? They will say, I'm in town to do shopping. If we started to ask them 20 years ago and more recently, they will say, I'm in town to be in town, to see what's going on, to follow the culture, to see the music, to see all the festivals and all the events which are developed. Also, we start at this time to have tourism, and tourists doesn't walk and walk, they also want to sit. And the people in the northern countries, where the weather is not so good, they have been down in Lisboa, and seen how wonderful you can sit on a cafe. So leisure time is drinking drinks on a cafe, and then they started the cappuccino. In the cappuccino culture started to spread. This was the second phase. Now we're into the third phase, where it's more and more geared towards inviting people for activity, sports, and having fun, like swimming in the harbor of Copenhagen. We have now 4 swimming arrangements in the harbor. Also, the architecture starts to be more fun. Now we are into the fourth phase, which is about climate adaptation. So now they combine making squares and streets so they can absorb great number of water with great number of fun. That means that these squares can they can suck up the water, and when it's not a storm, it could be a wonderful playground for grown-ups and children alike. Then Copenhagen now has this policy, we will be the best city in the world for people, and they do it for livability, for sustainability, for the health of the individual, but for the social inclusion in the city and for democracy. They say in this one, come out of your isolation, come out of your private seclusion, and drop your iPhone for a moment and come out and join your fellow citizens in the streets and squares, participate in our cultural events. And they think that it's really a good thing if people walk more and use the public spaces more. That's good for everything. So that's the strategy now. Part of this strategy is the redoing of all the major streets in Copenhagen. They all used to look like that up there, where you have 5 lanes up for cars and some bicycles floating around. Now every street, major street, is 2 lanes, one each way, a median, street trees, bicycle lanes, and sidewalks. And this lower street is much more beautiful, much more safe, and it can take the same number of cars as the upper street, because the traffic engineers now, they are much smarter than they used to be 20 years ago. What has happened in Copenhagen, where we were not Italians, where that a distinct culture of using public space has developed. And we've actually learned from a place like this one that if you really invite people to come and enjoy the city and each other, they will gradually get into this. This culture will gradually develop. And now we have these fantastic places where every time it's good weather, you can see thousands of people having a jolly good time. Also in Copenhagen, as you know, they have very early on started to celebrate bicycling, inviting people to bicycle. There are now a complete citywide network of bicycle lanes, good bicycle lanes with curb here and curb to the cars. It's developed into a transportation system. Every third family with children have a cargo bike so they can transport their kids to the school. And the kids like much more to sit here than to be strapped in the rear seat of a car, I can tell you. Also, the crucial part in a bicycle system is the crossings. That's where people get hurt, and they have now experimented, and they have been pretty good in making the crossings safe. And that means that my grandchildren, when they are 12 years, they are allowed to bicycle all over the city. And that means that children from they are 12 are mobile and could go everywhere, which is a fantastic freedom for children. And also it means that guys like my wife and I, we can continue to bike because it's safe and good. To have a good bicycle system, you must integrate it with the other modes of transport. It's done here with the trains, city trains, and it's free and very popular. So gradually a bicycle culture has step by step been developed in Copenhagen. Everybody bikes, the businessmen, the pregnant women, the children, the government. It's not every government, but some of the governments, they bicycle. Here is one of the governments coming up to the Queen to get their commissions as ministers. And they went up to the guards and say, would you please look after our bicycles? We have some business with the Queen. And that day there were no bicycles stolen. That was a glorious day. But it's very important that the mayor bicycles and that the key figures in society also bicycles. I'll tell you a little story about when my wife and I, when we had our 45th anniversary, that's about 10 years ago. We were at that time 70, and we had this 45th anniversary. We thought we will celebrate, we'll go into the town and we will have a good dinner. And then we climbed on our bicycles, and then we started from our home, and then we bicycled side by side on good bicycle lanes all the way to the city center. We went around in the city center, saw all the nice new cafes which have happened in the meantime. We went over the harbor and back, had dinner, and then if you have dinner on a bicycle, you can have 2 extra glasses of red wine. So there was a little bit but we managed to get home, and when we got home, we have done 19.8 kilometers, being 70 side by side in comfort and safety. And we were discussing that when we were married, this could never have happened. That you can do all this in your mature age. That was fantastic. And all these sidewalk cafes also would happen in these years. And then we started to realize that in the 45 years and now 55 years we've been married, we really have the feeling that every morning when we have woken up, the city has been a little bit better than yesterday. And that's a fantastic feeling to have, to know that your children will live in a city which is better than the one you started with, and your grandchildren can go by bike all over the place. That's a rather nice feeling. Many cities are for sure being worse every day. I'll tell you, here we put it down on, I did this in New York to tell what you could do in Copenhagen. You can start in Central Park, you can bicycle with your wife all the way to the other end of Manhattan. You can go over to to New Jersey and go back again and have dinner and come back, 90.8 kilometers. They were completely amazed that this would be 19 kilometers in New York. What more about bicycle culture? Yeah, this is my late mother-in-law. When she had the habit to come and visit us 2 times a day to see if everything was all right. And she was alone, and she came with her Volkswagen and saw everything was basically all right, so she went away again, came a little bit later. Then she couldn't drive anymore, but then she jumped on her bicycle. Also, she bought a house which was closer. So she had her bicycle, and she came 2 times a day on her bicycle to see if everything was fine. It was fine. Then she got dizzy, and she couldn't really bicycle anymore. But then I noticed that she came 2 times a day still, but now she dragged her bicycle. And I said, but mother-in-law, why are you dragging your bicycle? You are not bicycling anymore. Ha! It's much more sporty to drag a bicycle than to go with one of these. This is bicycle culture. This is what we have in Copenhagen. Do we have problems? Yes, we do have problems. And one of the major problems which we talk about much, this is from 2002, and that's 15 years ago, but we've talked about it ever since, that is congestion on the bicycle lanes. Because the more and more bicycles, then we have more and more problems with having enough space. What they have done is they've taken all the critical parts and doubled the bicycle lanes. They've taken the asphalt from the cars, because a bicycle lane can take 5 times more people than can a car lane, so it's good transport economy to give the space to the bicycles. Also in the trains, they've had to double the capacity to fit all the people, because it's really smart to have this system that you can bike 2 kilometers to the station, take the bicycle with you and bike 2 kilometers on the other end, so you get exercise and you get many kilometers. The last thing, the recent thing they've done is they make a lot of bridges everywhere to make shortcuts, and the idea is it shall always be quicker to take your bike than to go by car to any destination. And where are we now? 41% of everybody every day use the bicycle to go to work or to study in Copenhagen, and that's a pretty good figure compared to other cities. And that means that Copenhagen, they have invited bicycle for a long time, and they really have succeeded in getting the people out to do it. And that means that the city is much more friendly, and that means that you have a rather quiet atmosphere, because there's not so much rushing in cars. And actually, the car traffic is considerably lower than in any other city of 1.5 million in Europe, because of the bicycles. And then, of course, I could stop. I will not. But I could have stopped here and say, welcome to the 21st century. But I think I've got a little extra here. There's some good news for you. That's the Peter Newman story. It's a TED Talk from 2014. Are we winning? Yes, we are. Who is Peter Newman? That's the #1 sustainability expert in the world. He is down in Australia. He's been following development of transport policies very carefully through all the years. And he did this TED Talk. You can go and see it. And he said, it's important that we notice that the car traffic has topped. It's on the way down. In America, they are down to a level of 20 years ago. The next generation doesn't get as many licenses as this generation. And the really sinners to the climate are the baby boomers of the post-war generation, the people who are now between 60 and dead, whatever. This is America. This is Australia. So he sees this is a worldwide trend that people have actually started to think, is it really so smart? And if you go to Mexico City or Sao Paulo or some of the bigger cities, you really think about, is it really so smart, this technology of giving each person a ton of steel and 4 rubber wheels and say, now you are individual mobile. It's very smart in the Wild West in Detroit 100 years ago, but it's not smart in big cities in our day and time. It's simply a technology which is vastly outdated. It has not changed at all in all these years. They've just changed the color of the cars. What is growing now worldwide is public transportation. Especially it is the metro lines, and especially in Asia, where in China they built more subways in 10 years than the rest of the world in the rest of the history. And what else is expanding? That is bicycling. Bicycling is really on its way up. This is, of course, from Russia. It's a normal day in Moscow. I cannot remember if it's the right or the left picture, which was the normal day. The other thing is a bicycle demonstration, but in just 5 years, Moscow has poured bicycle lanes all over the place. So has New York, and so has many, many other cities, and we can see bicycling is on the incline. Now is the end, and you'll be happy. I was at a conference this spring in India, and the poster of the conference was this one, Building for the Future, Restoring the Past. And I went around with this poster all over the place, say, oh, please say me, is this the future or the past? And then most of them say, this is the future. And I say, oh, holy Moses. Then I went to another conference with UN Habitat, and here is the urban agenda. Is this the future or the past? As far as I'm concerned, it's really the past. They have 6 windmills, but that's about it. All the rest is crap. I gave a talk some time ago to some students. They wanted a very frank lecture about what to do and what not to do. And they wanted to hear my vision for the future city. And what I told them what not to do is don't do Dubai. Dubai is really modernism and motorism in an extreme form. And you can ask yourself, is this what you can do for mankind in 2017? And you see here but how Dubai is just a collection of funny buildings. And you can see also this, I think they are hopefully a species which is going out of trade. That is the bird shit architects who fly over all the cities and drop random towers wherever they can deliver a tower. So I told the student, don't do Dubai. That is not what we can do today as a good city. And then, of course, what could we do? What is my ideal? Yeah, for God's sake, make Venice, but with no stairs and plus bicycles, and put a fantastic subway system underneath. And to me, Venice means great neighborhoods which are good for children, good for grown-ups, good for health, good for climate, good for elderly people, if there are no stairs. So, future, in my point of view, is great neighborhoods, and underneath a fantastic public transportation system where you can bring your bike from one neighborhood to the other. We shall remember that the client now is the same it's always been. We have no new species. We have the same species, Homo sapiens. It's slow, linear, horizontal, 5 kilometers an hour. It's made for walking. The greatest day in life is the day when you raise and show mother that you can walk. Then everything starts. And this creature has a great interest in other people. It's a social animal. So, build it for the people and build it from bottom up, and good luck with this book. Make sure you have time to read it, and I shall sign books until midnight. Thank you very much.